ClancyPasta presents The Tree with Orange Bark, written by Dogeman87. Trees were not meant to be this color. There is a fungus that can turn bark yellow or orange. This tree was not covered in fungus. The bark was smooth to the touch, like a beech or sycamore, despite the many ridges visible in the wood. A virus, cirrhosis, can also lead to an orange shade. The virus causes bark to flake and leaves to fall off. Unfortunately, the trunk's unbroken surface did not lend credence to this theory. The tree was a bloody orange, like that of a sunset, except this tree was around at all hours of the day. It had leaves of gold and brown. The branches were tangled together in knots, and the tree itself was tall, maybe 100 feet high, much higher than the surrounding trees. In comparison, the rest of the forest was a collection of saplings. The tree had not been there before. About a year ago, it had suddenly appeared, not sprouting out of the ground, but simply existing when I had returned from work that day. Surrounding it are red maples and beeches and other less common trees. Someone nearby owns a small grove of cherry trees. None of those trees are like this one. None of them are unusual either. They do not bleed at night, run red down their trunks in iridescent rivulets, or give off light like a bioluminescent fungus. I found myself there one night, wandering down the path to the tree without knowing where I would go. Often I found myself walking into the woods to get a good view of the sky. I live in a rural area, so the night is brilliant, and I can often see the Milky Way stretching across the heavens. The tree pulled me to it. It might as well have used a physical hand. I diverged from the path and ended up in front of it, staring up at its massive branches that, in the starlight, looked more like bleeding arteries and veins. The orange-red bark radiated and cast light over its surroundings. I felt sickened, like I was bathing in blood and had accidentally swallowed some. Do not ask how I came up with that specific analogy. The tree can induce many visions that are disturbingly vivid. There had been 2 or 3 before, one involving an eviscerated man that I cannot stand to describe, much less recall in detail. That night was different, somehow. The tree was inviting me. I would often walk by it at dawn or dusk and feel a presence, like how some people feel they're being watched when they are alone. The tree's presence was not hostile, really, just foreign. I had never thought much of it, chalking up my sensations to nerves. You may wonder why I never told anyone about these things. I tried. My sister, who lives only a few minutes away, went out with me one night to experience the tree. She did not see it. No one did. And when I took photographs or video, I only recorded a normal beech tree, one that was not 100 feet tall or covered in orange bark. She thought at first I had mental problems, schizophrenia maybe, but I convinced her I did not. In my 40-some years of life, I have not experienced even the slightest hallucination. People I work with think I am normal. My boss thinks I am normal. My mother does not approve of my having chosen a solitary life, but she has never known me to hallucinate or speak as if I were possessed. I even agreed to see a therapist, and the barrage of tests that were thrown at me did not reveal an underlying illness. I know the tree is real. I can touch it, I can sense it. I see its light cast upon the sky on nights when I stay inside. It is no less real than the rest of the trees in the forest, which, unlike the one in question, are quite visible to the rest of the world. The orange tree, for some reason, is different. That night, when I looked up at the woven branches, I saw something. I cannot say what it was exactly, only that it was not a thing that should have existed. I could make out many limbs, and I could tell that it was larger than any normal-sized animal, certainly larger than a bird or small mammal that one would expect to see. There are no monkeys where I live, so that was not an option either. I did make out one feature. The animal, if it was an animal at all, had orangish eyes tinged with specks of red. The color was identical to that of the tree. Make of this what you will. 2 nights later, I returned to the tree and saw nothing strange. There were no animals creeping amongst the branches, and the tree did not pull at me as it had earlier that week. It was as it had been for most of the past year: stolid, regal, horrifying. In short, it was a menagerie of many things, evoking a different reaction in me each time I saw it. The problem arose when I tried to leave. Like most sensible people, I do not like sleeping in the woods, especially without shelter or a sleeping bag. Bears roam these parts, and it would be easy for me to find myself being torn to shreds if I stayed where I was. The tree, however, was insistent. Every time I tried to walk down the path to my house, I found myself walking toward it. The pull that I had felt days before was now stronger than ever, and might as well have been attached by a steel cable to the tree. I could not leave, could not so much as lose sight of the orange bark before I found it looming in my vision again, as tall and mysterious as ever. I was not scared. Not yet. I was more curious than anything. I looked closer at the tree. Nothing had changed at first glance. It was the same orange-red color, and the same unwieldy knot of branches and roots. There was an owl overhead. I could not see it, only hear its lonely calls. Since I could not seem to leave, I decided to sit down next to the tree. That turned out to be a mistake. The line that had tethered me to it began to tug. I had never climbed a tree in my life, but at that moment, I found myself scrambling up the smooth bark, finding footholds where there was only air, grasping onto grooves that a second earlier had not existed. It wanted me to climb. That is why I was able to ascend. When I reached the top, I walked out onto a skinny branch, much like how a ballerina tiptoes across a stage. Unlike the ballerina, however, I found myself almost 100 feet above the ground. The branch did not bend at all, though it was no thicker than my own leg. It should have snapped. Instead, it supported me as if I were no heavier than an insect. At no point was I gripped by fear or uncertainty. If the tree had wanted to kill me, it would have. If nature had decided to restore the laws of physics, I would have fallen well before I had reached the branch I stood on. Then I heard the screams. They were not what you would think. They were not human, exactly. The sounds were like a garbled mix of human, hyena, dog, and any number of other animals, blended into one through editing software or overlaid recordings. Despite their apparently random nature, there was an order to the noises. They seemed to be telling me something. I could not say what, only that I thought I heard my name before the branch beneath me snapped. I did not fall. I instead was on a hot surface, at first smooth as glass, but beneath my hand, as coarse as sand. My eyes were closed, and when I opened them, I wished I never had. Something was standing over me. I cannot describe it as more than blackness. The form had a humanoid shape, what appeared to be arms and legs, but mostly it was black, featureless, except for 2 glowing eyes that did not need a full face to convey their hatred. Those eyes were mere inches from mine, and I knew that any attempt to escape would be fruitless. The dark creature placed what I guessed was a hand on my chest, and my entire body began to burn. I don't just mean the sensation, I mean it actually started burning. I could not scream. I could not beg for mercy. I could only feel my skin crackle and watch the flames spread out from my chest. I saw then that surrounding me were other flames, other bodies, if what was happening to me was not unique. I would like to have called it hell, except there were no lakes of fire or river Styx. There was only the crushed glass, what I had thought was sand, and now that I focused more closely, screams of the anguished. Perhaps it was hell. I do not think it was. I believe that I had been transported to something worse, a place that not even Satan would have allowed to exist, because the suffering there was not merely physical, it was mental because throughout my few moments there I could only hear the continually louder screams that I eventually thought would blow my eardrums. Then there was the other pain. I think that my very soul began to suffer, because I felt a tug within me, outside of me. And then I saw a ghostly image of myself, screaming so loud that I in fact did lose my hearing. I felt blood running out of my ears and heard a ringing that faded into silence. Then I woke up. I was leaning against the tree. Its bark was no longer orange, it was pure red, and next to me sat the owl I had seen before. It was decapitated. The first thing I tried to do was leave. That did not work. Like before, I only found myself walking toward the tree again. Next, I tried pleading with whatever entities had brought it to my world. I did not want answers. I did not care if the tree disappeared or not. I just wanted to leave so that I could ensure that I never went into the forest again and thus never encountered the tree. If there were beings that listened, they ignored me. I walked frantically for some time, returning to the tree like metal to a magnet, until I found that it was gone. In its place was a tree-shaped hole in the ground, dropping into a dark abyss. I did not hesitate when I jumped down it. Do not ask me why I did so. It was much like when I was drawn to the tree, when I did not know where I was going until I arrived. This time, I was not transported to the beach of glass. Instead, I found a world destroyed. There were some features that indicated it had been Earth. Blackened grass, fallen trees, the same sun obscured behind a reddish sky. And yet, it was not Earth at the same time. There were 2 moons in the sky that joined the sun. They were large, almost twice the size of Earth's normal moon, and they were blood red. There was also a shadow over the land, like the darkness in the figure I had seen before. It was absolute, obscuring any details beneath it, and the shadow was spreading, crawling in my direction. My family was there. My niece and nephew, my parents, my siblings. They were all dead. Their bodies laid on the ground, displaying various forms of torture, burns, and puncture wounds and gunshots in places that most likely would not have killed them. A couple were missing eyes. My nephew, an energetic 9-year-old boy, had been amputated below the knee, and a foot was sticking out of his mouth. I would have vomited had I been able to. When I tried, I realized that only my eyes could move. The rest of my body was frozen. Soon, my eyes were too, locking upon the dark shadow that was making its way toward me. I did not want to find out what was inside. I suspected it might be worse than what was in front of me, if you can even imagine that is possible. Death and the death of others would be a mercy compared to whatever resided in that darkness. I woke up a second time. I say woke up because there is no better way to describe it. One second, I was in a foreign realm, and the next, I was sitting against the orange tree. I do not believe what I had was a dream, or that the places I saw were not real. I just think that describing them as such is the easiest way to explain it. One final vision awaited me. This time I could not so much as stand before I found myself there. I was floating in space. Around me were the stars, but standing out between them was a void, bigger than any I had seen. In it, I implicitly understood that the Earth had existed. Above, a dense cluster of gas gave birth to more stars. I'm not an astronomer, so don't ask how I knew this. I just did. That darkness that had swallowed the Earth was the same as the one that I had seen in the 2 previous visions, and implicitly, I knew that once life was swallowed, it was transported to the beach of glass. There, souls would be tormented, but not indefinitely. There was a worse place that would follow. Given what I had seen, I could not imagine anything worse, and I didn't have to. I saw a brief glimpse of it. Imagine the worst pain you have ever felt. Maybe it was a broken bone, maybe a torn tendon, or if you are a woman, childbirth. Now imagine something worse than that. If the worst pain you have experienced is mild, you cannot comprehend what I mean. If you have experienced pain, like with childbirth, then you might have an idea of the brief sensation that came upon me. The pain was bad enough to make me lose my vision. I wanted to die then. I imagined that ripping my heart and organs out would produce a less dramatic effect. Worse, that was not the only source of my suffering. The sensation of my soul being ended, then being shredded into shards, much like the glass on the beach, it was worse than what I had experienced before. This type of pain I cannot describe. It transcends the physical, transcends any emotional or mental anguish. This new pain is why I say that my final experience, the one beyond the glass beach, was the worst. I woke up where the tree had been. There was no longer a tree with orange bark. There was instead a redwood, which was equally impossible, and a note tacked to its trunk. It was not in English, instead written in a cuneiform language. Nevertheless, I understood it. It promised that what I had seen was real, and that it would await me and everyone else in this world. The redwood crumbled before my eyes as I finished reading, and in its place stood an ordinary beach. I sat down in the dirt, trying to understand what I had seen, and ultimately coming here to Reddit to record my experiences because writing them down was the only way to prove to myself they had happened. There is still hope. At the end of that note, I was told that there is a way to stop the merging of hell and earth, as it was called. I still believe what I saw was not hell, that it was something worse and perhaps beyond our universe. The note said that I had to do something very specific. I cannot share with you the details, but I can say this. God is a lie, and the universe was an accident. The black figure I saw was one of many, serving an entity that you might consider as a sort of Satan. Except, it is worse, and it wants payment. I will have to do terrible things to sate its appetite. Others will, too, because I know my orange tree was not unique. There are others, there have been others, and there will be more in the future. I would like to blame all of humanity's evil on the trees, but I cannot. Some of it is our own doing. Some, though, is entertainment for the dark figures. Who knows? Maybe someone you know will become ill or die in the next couple days. They might be harmed by my actions, or by those of others, or by your own if you encounter the tree with orange bark. All I can say is that heaven and hell and God, any deity that religion might conjure up, it's all fantasy. The reality is that we are continuously running from our deaths. I suppose that much is obvious, and that the universe must end. But this death will be much starker, and it will not be the end. In all likelihood, we will be taken to other worlds, other dimensions, where suffering will continue. Our only hope is to please the dark figures, because no matter what you might think, they are all that stand between my visions and reality.
Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. I want to give a huge thanks to all of my supporters over at Patreon and YouTube memberships. Your support makes these narrations possible, and I appreciate it a ton. If you'd like to join these lovely ghouls, you can head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/ClancyPasta, or click the join button below to become a member. And if you'd like creepy cool shirts, make sure to head on over and check out my official merch store for some awesome tees, hoodies, stickers, and more. Alright, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great night. Cheers.